She flew 13 hours to show him a blurry black and white photograph of their unborn child. Instead, she watched another woman's fingers trace the dragon tattoo on her husband's chest. Evelyn Ashford didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply turned around, walked back into the elevator, and let the doors close on everything she thought her life was. That single moment cost her 3 years of hiding, one daughter raised in secret, and a heart that never fully healed. This is the story of what happens when the truth finally catches up, and forgiveness becomes the hardest war ever fought. Stay until the end, hit like, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The flight from New York to Seoul took 13 hours and 40 minutes. Evelyn had counted every one of them. She sat in business class with her knees pressed together and her carry-on bag tucked underneath the seat in front of her, not because she needed the legroom, but because she needed something solid to press her feet against, something that confirmed she was still moving forward. She hadn't slept. She had tried, twice, pulling the thin airline blanket up to her chin and closing her eyes, but her mind kept cycling back to the same image. The grainy ultrasound photograph sitting inside the breast pocket of her blazer, folded in thirds, the edges already soft from how many times she had unfolded and refolded it over the past 4 days. 11 weeks. The doctor had told her 11 weeks with the kind of practiced cheerfulness that fills examination rooms, and Evelyn had nodded like she was receiving directions to a restaurant rather than news that would permanently alter the architecture of her entire life. She had driven herself home. She had poured a glass of water she didn't drink. She had sat at the kitchen island in the apartment she and Lucien kept in Manhattan, the one she used when he was abroad, the one that smelled like lemon cleaning products and absinthe. And she had thought about what it meant to tell a man like Lucien Cade that he was going to be a father. She wasn't afraid of him. She wanted to make that clear to herself. She had married him knowing who he was, or at least knowing enough of who he was to understand that the elegant suits and the museum benefactor dinners and the quiet, precise way he spoke to people represented only the visible surface of something much larger and much darker underneath. She had not been naive, she had been deliberate, and there was a difference, even when the outcome looked identical from the outside. What she was afraid of was something more specific, and therefore more difficult to name. She was afraid that the moment she showed him that photograph, something would be required of her that she hadn't decided yet whether she could give. So she booked a flight to Seoul instead of calling. She told herself it was because she wanted to see his face. That was partially true. The car service she arranged through the hotel's concierge met her at Incheon just after 6 in the morning, local time. The driver was young and professional and didn't try to make conversation, which she was grateful for. Seoul moved past the windows in the early gray light, cranes and apartment towers, and the Han River catching the flat glow of a sky that hadn't decided yet whether to clear. Evelyn watched it without really seeing it, her hand pressed flat against her stomach through the fabric of her coat, a gesture she wasn't fully conscious of making. Lucien was staying at the Shilla. He always stayed at the Shilla when he was in Seoul for business. He had been here 11 days. That was 4 days longer than the trip was supposed to last, and he had explained the extension with 2 sentences in a text message that told her very little, and she had accepted because she had learned, over 4 years of marriage to this man, that asking certain questions produced only more carefully constructed non-answers. She knew the shape of his work even when she didn't know the details. She knew enough to know there were parts she wasn't supposed to know. She had accepted that arrangement in the beginning because she was also a woman with carefully maintained compartments, and she had thought they understood each other. The lobby of the Sheila was already moving when she arrived, businessmen in dark suits crossing marble floors, a cluster of women in matching red jackets waiting near the concierge desk. Evelyn carried her own bag. She hadn't checked in. She had booked a room at a different hotel 2 blocks away because she wanted the option of retreating, and wanting that option told her something about the state of her own confidence that she filed away without examining too closely. She knew Lucien's suite number because she knew the account he used to book hotels, and she had looked it up before she left New York with the kind of quiet efficiency that is sometimes indistinguishable from desperation. 31st floor. She took the elevator. The hallway was carpeted and very quiet. It was 6:47 in the morning. She was aware of her own footsteps, the soft, compressed sound of her boots on the carpet, the way her breath had gone a little shallower in the past 30 seconds without her permission. She stopped in front of the door and put her hand in her pocket and touched the folded ultrasound without taking it out. A steadying gesture. something to hold on to. She heard voices inside, not the television. She had lived with Lucien for 4 years, and she knew the difference between background noise and conversation, knew the particular frequency of his voice when he was speaking to another person rather than narrating something he was watching on a screen. His voice was low, and she couldn't make out words, but she could make out tone, and the tone was not professional. It was the low, unhurried register of a man who was comfortable. She should have knocked. She recognized later that she should have knocked, that everything that happened next would have been different if she had simply raised her fist and knocked on that door and waited for an answer like an ordinary person. But she didn't knock. She pressed the card key she had. She had a card key because he had given her one at the beginning of the trip, and she had kept it in her wallet without thinking much about it. She pressed it against the reader, heard the soft click, and pushed the door open. The suite was large and lit by weak morning light filtering through curtains that were mostly closed. She registered the room in fragments the way the brain does when it encounters something it isn't prepared for. A room service cart near the window, 2 glasses, a jacket thrown over the back of a chair that wasn't Lucien's jacket, the television on mute showing something she didn't look at, and Lucien on the couch, his shirt open, and a woman beside him, her hand resting on his chest, directly on the ink of the dragon that ran from his shoulder to his ribs. Her fingers were moving slowly, the way you touch something you know well. The scene lasted maybe 4 seconds, probably fewer. Later, Evelyn would be unable to reconstruct it with any precision because her brain had gone very quiet and very cold in the way it does when it is protecting you from something it knows you cannot absorb all at once. She saw his face turn toward her. She saw his expression shift. Not guilt, or not only guilt, something more complicated and more urgent than guilt. He said her name. She was certain he said her name. She stepped back into the hallway. She pulled the door closed behind her. She stood for a moment with her hand still on the handle, staring at the flat metallic surface of the door, as if it were going to offer her some explanation, and then she walked to the elevator and pressed the button and stood very still while she waited for it to arrive. She did not cry in the elevator. She cried later, in the different hotel 2 blocks away, sitting on the bathroom floor with her coat still on and the ultrasound photograph unfolded on the tile beside her, and she cried until her chest hurt and her face was swollen, and she felt scraped out and empty in a way that had nothing to do with 11 weeks of pregnancy and everything to do with the specific, surgical pain of realizing that the architecture you built your life inside was never as solid as you needed it to be. Her phone started ringing before she made it back to her room. She turned it off. She sat with what she knew, not what she suspected or what she feared, what she knew. She had seen a woman's hand on her husband's chest at 6:47 in the morning in a hotel suite that smelled like 2 people who had been sharing a space for more than a few hours. She had married a man who ran organizations that operated outside ordinary law, and she had told herself that the danger lived at a careful distance from the life they were building together. And she had believed that because she needed to believe it, and that belief now felt like the most expensive thing she had ever purchased. She was 11 weeks pregnant. She was in Seoul. She was 34 years old, and her hands would not stop shaking. She made 3 decisions in the next 40 minutes, sitting on that bathroom floor with her back against the cold wall of the tub. She made them with the deliberate, almost dissociative clarity that very occasionally arrives in the worst moments, when the emotional center shuts down and some other part of the brain takes the wheel. The first decision was that she was not going back to that hotel. The second was that she was not calling Lucien back. The third was that the child she was carrying would not grow up in the world Lucien occupied. Whatever else happened, whoever else Lucien Cade turned out to be beneath the version she had married, she would not hand her daughter. She felt with absolute certainty in that moment that it was a daughter. She would not hand her daughter a childhood surrounded by the infrastructure of power and secrecy and harm that she had spent 4 years telling herself was peripheral to her real life. It was not peripheral. She understood that now. It was the foundation. She booked a flight home departing at 2 in the afternoon. Then she booked a different flight, one leaving earlier from a different terminal, using a credit card she kept for herself that Lucien didn't know about. Not because she had been planning this, because she was a careful woman, and careful women maintain options. She left Seoul the same morning she arrived. Reinventing yourself requires more paperwork than people expect. Evelyn spent the first 3 weeks after Seoul at her sister's house in Portland, sleeping in the guest room that smelled like cedar and old magazines, eating soup her sister made from a recipe their mother used to make, and working through what needed to happen next with the systematic thoroughness that had made her one of the most respected curators in the country. She was good at taking a thing apart to see how it worked. She was doing that now with her own life. She hired an attorney she found through a colleague, someone who handled situations that required discretion, which was how the colleague phrased it, and which Evelyn understood to mean someone who had experience with clients who had complicated entanglements with complicated men. She liquidated her personal accounts. She changed her phone. She had already, 3 years into the marriage, maintained a professional identity separate from Mrs. Lucian Cade, which she had done instinctively, and which now turned out to be the most practical decision she had made in the entirety of their relationship. She did not file for divorce. Not yet. Filing would leave a trail, and a trail would give Lucienne a thread to pull. Her sister knew not to ask direct questions. That was the thing about family. The good ones understood the difference between support and interrogation. She brought soup, and she held Evelyn's hand when Evelyn needed it, and she did not once say the words, "I told you so," even though she had, in fact, said something structurally similar approximately 18 months before the wedding. The morning sickness arrived in earnest around week 13. Evelyn sat on the bathroom floor again, but this time for different reasons, and this time there was a cup of ginger tea on the counter that her sister had put there wordlessly before dawn. She focused on the practical management of each day, food she could keep down, sleep before 11, feet elevated, iron supplements. The body makes demands, and meeting them becomes its own kind of structure. She chose the coastal city for reasons that were partly logical and partly something harder to categorize. A colleague had mentioned it casually 2 years before, a place with a real arts community, affordable studio space, a university with a strong humanities program. Far enough from New York that she would not accidentally encounter anyone who knew Lucian. Close enough to an airport that she could maintain her professional work without disappearing entirely into obscurity. She arrived in late October, when the light off the water had that particular amber quality that belongs to autumn afternoons in coastal places, and she found a small house 3 blocks from the beach with a second bedroom that would make a decent nursery. She paid the security deposit in cash. She put down a new name, her middle name combined with her grandmother's last name, and she signed the lease with the focused, slightly mechanical composure of a woman who has decided that forward motion is the only option available to her. She built a life. That is not a small thing, and she never pretended it was. She built it methodically and without sentiment, the way you build anything that needs to stand up against weather. She registered with a local OB, established herself as an art consultant, doing independent work for galleries and private collectors, and introduced herself to neighbors with the calibrated warmth of someone who genuinely enjoys people but is not yet ready to be known by any of them. Isla arrived in March, 2 weeks early, small and loud, and absolutely certain of her own requirements from the first moment of her life. Evelyn held her in the delivery room with the kind of awe that cannot be manufactured or performed, the particular awe of a person who has been moving so hard and so fast for so long that stillness arrives as a shock. And she looked at her daughter's face and felt something realign inside her chest that she hadn't known was crooked. She did not allow herself to think about the fact that Isla had her father's eyes. She did not allow herself to think about Lucien. She was largely unsuccessful on both counts, but she tried, and the trying gave her enough structure to get through the first year, which was the hardest year, which everyone who has raised a child alone will recognize as true. By the time Isla was 2, Evelyn had built something real. She had a reputation in the regional arts community, considered, knowledgeable, trustworthy, which in the art world is worth more than talent, because talent is common and trustworthiness is not. She consulted for a gallery in the city's historic district and had begun fielding inquiries from collectors in Boston and Chicago. She had friends, actual friends, the kind that arrived at your door with wine when you had a hard week and who remembered your daughter's birthday without being reminded. She had not told any of them who she was before she came here. She had not told any of them who Isla's father was. She had not spoken to Lucian Cade in 2 years and 8 months. She had been careful. She had been, she believed, meticulous. She had maintained the kind of careful invisibility that requires constant low-grade vigilance, the kind you stop noticing after a while because it becomes simply the texture of your daily life, the way people who grow up near train tracks stop hearing the trains. She had not allowed herself to believe she was entirely safe. But she had, somewhere around Isla's first birthday, allowed herself to believe she was far enough away that safe and unsafe were abstract concerns rather than immediate ones. That was a mistake. She would understand that later. It was a Tuesday in early November, and Isla was at the neighbors for the afternoon, and Evelyn came home to find her apartment exactly as she had left it that morning. Keys on the hook, dishes drying on the rack, afternoon light cutting through the blinds and laying stripes across the hardwood floor. Except on the kitchen table, in a plain white envelope that had not been there when she left, there were photographs. 8 of them. 8 photographs printed on standard paper, arranged in 2 rows. Photographs of her walking to the grocery store. Photographs of her picking Isla up from the neighbor's house. One photograph taken from across the street of Evelyn standing at her own living room window with a cup of coffee, looking out at nothing, completely unaware. The photographs were not new. Some of them were dated by the angle of the light and the clothes she was wearing to several months ago. Someone had been watching her for months. Someone had been inside her apartment. Someone had left these photographs on her kitchen table and departed without a trace, and the message was so clear it did not need to be written down. "We know where you are." Her phone rang while she was still standing at the table, still holding 2 of the photographs, her fingers leaving prints on the edges without her noticing. The number was blocked. She stood there for 3 full rings before she answered it, and she answered it because not answering felt more dangerous than answering, because she had learned something in the past 3 years about the relationship between information and survival. And what she had learned was that uncertainty is its own kind of danger. She brought the phone to her ear. "She has my eyes." His voice was exactly as she remembered it. Low, controlled, the particular kind of calm that is not actually calm at all, but the surface of something very deep and very pressurized. She recognized the restraint in it. She had always been able to hear the thing Lucian was not saying more clearly than the thing he was. She did not respond. She stood in her kitchen with the photographs spread across the table and her heart doing something irregular in her chest, and she waited. "Evelyn," he said, and then, quieter, "I need you to know that I'm not here to take her. That's not why I'm calling." "Then why are you calling?" Her voice came out steadier than she expected. There was a pause. She heard him exhale. "Because I saw her," he said, "from across the street, and I need you to understand that I am standing in your city, outside your life, and I am trying very hard to ask permission rather than simply walking through the door." She looked at the photographs on her table. She thought about the word permission and everything that word meant coming from a man who had spent his entire adult life operating in a world where permission was a courtesy rather than a requirement. "You've been watching me," she said. "Yes." "For how long?" Another pause, shorter this time. "Long enough to know she's healthy, long enough to know you built something good here." Another exhale. "Long enough to know I owe you an explanation that I should have forced you to hear 3 years ago." Evelyn set one of the photographs down on the table very carefully, the way you set down something fragile, even though it was just paper. "I'm not ready," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm asking you to consider getting ready." The line stayed open for another few seconds. Neither of them said anything. Then he disconnected, and Evelyn stood in her kitchen in the November light with photographs of her own life spread in front of her, and understood, with the cold clarity that had saved her more than once, that the careful distance she had built between her past and her present had just collapsed entirely. Whatever came next, it was not going to resemble the life she had constructed here. The only question was how much of that life she would be able to protect. And in the back of her mind, quieter than everything else, beneath the fear and the anger and the dull throb of grief she thought she had finished with years ago, a different question, one she was not yet willing to examine directly. What if he was telling the truth? She didn't sleep that night, not because Isla was restless. Isla slept the way she always slept, deeply and without apology, one arm thrown over the stuffed rabbit she called Benny, and her breath coming in slow, even pulls that Evelyn could hear through the baby monitor even now, at 3 in the morning, when the rest of the house was so quiet that the refrigerator's hum felt intrusive. Isla slept fine. It was Evelyn who lay on top of her covers, fully dressed, shoes still on, staring at the ceiling with the photographs arranged on the nightstand beside her because she couldn't decide whether to put them somewhere she couldn't see them or keep them exactly where they were, as evidence of something she hadn't yet determined the shape of. She had checked the locks 3 times. She had checked the windows. She had stood in Isla's doorway for a long time, watching her daughter breathe in the faint glow of the nightlight, the small chest rising and falling with complete indifference to the fact that the world outside had just rearranged itself. The question she wasn't willing to examine, what if he was telling the truth, had not gotten smaller during the night. It had gotten larger in the way that questions do when you try not to think about them, expanding to fill the space you're trying to deny them. She knew what she had seen in Seoul. She also knew, and had always known even when she was furiously not knowing it, that what she saw and what was actually happening were not necessarily the same thing. She was a woman who had spent her professional life understanding that context changes meaning. A painting that looks like chaos from 2 feet away resolves into order from 10. She knew this. She had built a career on this understanding. She had also seen a woman's hand on her husband's chest at 6:47 in the morning, and she had walked away, and she had not given him 30 seconds to explain, and she had been carrying that decision for 2 years and 8 months without once allowing herself to question whether it had been the right one. She got up at 4:30 and made coffee she didn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table where the photographs had been and looked at the empty surface and made herself think about what she actually wanted to do next, as opposed to what fear was telling her to do. Fear said, take Isla and move again. Different city, different name, deeper. The other part of her, the part that had survived Seoul and Portland, and a birth with no one in the room but a midwife she'd known for 4 months, and her own considerable stubbornness. That part said something different. That part said she was tired. That 3 years of vigilance had a weight to it that she had been carrying so long she'd stopped noticing. The way you stop noticing a sound until it stops, and only in the silence do you understand how loud it had been. She was tired of running. She hadn't let herself say that before. She said it now, quietly, to the empty kitchen, and the words sat in the air and didn't disappear. He called again the next morning. 8:15, block number, while she was getting Isla into her coat for the walk to the neighbors. She let it ring. He called at 8:40, after she got back. She answered. I want to meet, he said. No preamble. That was Lucien. He didn't use words to warm up to the thing he meant to say. He used them to say it. I know you do. Public place, anywhere you choose. I'll come alone. You being alone doesn't mean you're alone, she said. A pause. No, he said. It doesn't. But my people will stay back. You have my word. Your word, she said, and she didn't load the words with anything because she didn't need to. The silence between them was sufficient. Evelyn, his voice dropped half a register. I know what I'm asking you to trust. I'm not pretending I haven't earned your doubt. I'm asking anyway. She pulled her coat off the hook by the door and held it without putting it on. Looked at the middle distance. Thought about Isla at the neighbor's house, drawing pictures of horses on construction paper, completely unaware that her father had been standing across the street watching her from a distance, and that the word father was a thing that applied to her at all. There's a coffee place, Evelyn said, on Meridian, half a block from the water. It's called Portholes. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. I'll be there. Lucien. She stopped, started again. Come alone. Actually alone. Or I walk out and we do this through lawyers, and it takes 3 years and costs us both things we can't get back. Understood, he said. She hung up and stood in her hallway for a moment with the coat still in her hands. And then she hung it back on the hook because it was warm enough in the house, and she needed something to do with her hands that didn't involve making another decision. Portholes was the kind of place that had been there long enough to stop trying to be anything other than what it was, on scratched wooden tables, a counter with 6 stools, a chalkboard menu that hadn't changed in 2 years except for the seasonal soup. Evelyn had been coming here since she arrived in this city. The woman behind the counter knew her order. That familiarity was exactly why she'd chosen it. She needed to be somewhere she had the advantage of known geography. She arrived 12 minutes early and took the table in the back left corner, the one with a clear sight line to the door and the counter and the street-facing window. She ordered her coffee and wrapped both hands around the mug and watched the door. He came in at 8:58. She had not seen Lucien Cade in 2 years and 8 months, and the first thing she noticed was that he looked exactly like himself, which sounds like nothing but was actually something, because she had half expected time and distance to have softened him into something more manageable in her memory. He hadn't softened. He was still the same height, same particular economy of movement, The kind of man who doesn't take up more space than he needs because he has never had to prove how much space he could take. He was wearing a gray coat she didn't recognize, and his hair was slightly longer, and there were lines near his eyes that might have been new or might have always been there, and she was unsettled to discover she didn't know which. He saw her immediately. He crossed the room without looking at anything else. He sat down across from her without extending his hand or leaning in for any physical greeting, which she appreciated more than she would have predicted. He seemed to understand that she needed 6 inches of table between them. "You look good," he said. "Don't," she said. He closed his mouth, nodded once. Fair enough. The woman from the counter appeared, and Lucien ordered a black coffee with the brief, distracted politeness of a man whose mind is doing something complicated in another room. When she left, he put both hands flat on the table and looked at Evelyn with an attention that she remembered finding unnerving even when they were married. The way he looked at her like she was the most important thing in the room, and he was not going to waste that by looking at anything else. 3 years, she said, because someone had to start. 3 years, he said. You found me in 3 years. I found you in 14 months, he said. I spent the rest of the time deciding what to do about it. The coffee mug was warm in her hands. She made herself breathe evenly. You knew where I was for almost 2 years, and you didn't... I didn't know about Isla until 6 weeks ago. His jaw tightened. If I had known, Evelyn, if I had known, we would be having this conversation 2 years ago, and it would have gone differently. Different how? I would have come here instead of sending photographs. She looked at him. That was a stupid thing to do. I know. He didn't flinch from it. I needed you to know that I knew. I needed you off balance enough to answer the phone. He paused. It was stupid. I'm telling you, it was stupid. Evelyn set her mug down. You scared me, Lucien. You scared me in my own home, in my own kitchen. She stopped, started over, quieter. You need to understand that what you did is exactly the kind of thing that confirms every decision I made walking out of that hotel room. I know, he said again, and then, without patting it, I need to tell you about Soul. I know what I saw in Soul. You saw what you were meant to see. He leaned forward slightly. That's what I need you to understand. What was in that room was constructed. It was put together specifically to be seen by you, specifically at that time, specifically to produce exactly the result it produced. She stared at him. The noise of the coffee shop continued around them. Someone at the counter laughing, the machine steaming milk, the door opening on the street cold and then closing again. You're telling me it was staged, she said. I'm telling you it was staged. That's the most convenient explanation available to you. Yes, he said. I understand how it sounds. That's why I have documentation. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and withdrew a flat envelope and placed it on the table between them and left his hands off it, giving her the choice of whether to pick it up. She didn't pick it up. Not yet. Tell me first, she said. Without the papers, just tell me. He exhaled. She watched his chest move under the coat and thought about the dragon tattoo and then immediately stopped thinking about it. The CO family, he said. You won't know the name. You didn't need to know the name when we were married because I kept them away from everything that touched you, which is something I did deliberately and something that turned out to be insufficient. He spoke steadily, each sentence measured. They'd been running an operation out of Busan for about 12 years. When I expanded into the Korean market, we overlapped. There were 2 years of negotiation that went badly and ended badly, and by the time I was in Seoul, they had decided that the cleanest way to remove me was not violence. He looked at her. It was you. Me. You were the one thing I couldn't afford to lose. They knew that. His voice didn't waver, but something in his eyes did, briefly, like a light flickering in another room. The woman in my suite was on their payroll. She had been placed in proximity to my business in Seoul for 3 months before you arrived. The timing of your visit, they knew about it. Someone on my staff told them when you booked the flight. Someone on your staff, Evelyn said slowly. He's no longer a problem. She absorbed that with the particular quietness of a woman who has spent 4 years learning what certain phrases mean when spoken by certain men. So they knew I was coming, she said. They set up a scene, and they knew I wouldn't wait for an explanation. They knew that if you saw that and walked away before I could get to you, the damage would be... He stopped. his hands on the table pressed slightly flatter. They understood our marriage better than I thought anyone outside of it could. The envelope sat between them. Evelyn reached forward and picked it up. She spent 2 hours in portholes that morning. She went through the envelope page by page while Lucian drank his coffee and didn't rush her, and answered every question she asked with the specific factual precision of a man who has had 2 years and 8 months to anticipate each one. The security footage was there, time-stamped, unedited, 2 camera angles from the hotel corridor showing the woman entering the suite with a key card. A key card that record showed was issued through a subsidiary of a hospitality company with documented financial ties to the CO family's front operations. Financial records mapping payments to the woman across 18 months. A sworn statement from a former CO associate who had since relocated and who documented the entire operation in 11 pages of dense, specific language that did not read like something constructed after the fact. It did not prove everything. Evelyn was not naive enough to believe that documentation in the world Lucian occupied was beyond fabrication. She had spent enough years adjacent to that world to understand that evidence is a tool like any other, and that skilled people can build very convincing tools. But the documentation was extensive in a way that felt different from manufactured. The financial trails were granular and boring in the way that real financial trails are. The footage was badly lit and captured at awkward angles, the way real surveillance footage is, rather than with the suspicious clarity of something composed. The witness statement contained spelling errors and repetitions, and one crossed-out paragraph, which was either artful forgery or the authentic messiness of a real person trying to remember things in order. She sat back in her chair and looked at him. His coffee was long cold. "Why didn't you come after me immediately?" she said. "Why didn't you get on a plane that day?" He was quiet for a moment. "I tried," he said. "Your phone was off. I sent people to your apartment in New York and you weren't there. By the time I understood you had left the country rather than just left the hotel, you were gone." A pause. "I spent 4 months finding out where you'd gone, and when I found Portland, I found that you'd already left Portland, and by the time—" He stopped. Something moved across his face that he didn't bother to conceal. "I was not handling it cleanly. I want to be honest with you about that. I was not in a condition to walk through a door into your life. I needed to be sure I wasn't going to make it worse. And sending photographs to my kitchen table was better." "No," he said. "It was not better. It was a failure of judgment at the end of a very long string of failures of judgment, and I cannot sit here and defend it." Evelyn folded the envelope closed, set it on the table. "I have a daughter," she said. "Her name is Isla. She is 2 years and 8 months old, and she likes horses, and she is afraid of the sound the garbage truck makes on Tuesday mornings, and she sleeps with a stuffed rabbit named Benny, and she has never once asked me where her father is, because I have not given her the vocabulary to ask that question." Lucian sat very still. "Yeah." "And you have been standing across the street from her?" Evelyn continued, her voice level and controlled and costing her something to keep that way. "And watching her, and she doesn't know you exist. And I don't know what you want from me, but I need you to understand that whatever happens next, she is not a negotiating position. She is not leverage. She is a child, and if I ever believe for 1 second that she is being used as a tool in whatever this is, I will disappear in a way that makes the last 3 years look like a forwarding address." "What?" He looked at her for a long time. "I want to meet her," he said. "That's what I want. I want to meet my daughter. That is not a decision I can make in a coffee shop." "I know. That's not a decision I can make this week." "I know," he said again, and then quietly, "I'm not going anywhere, Evelyn. I have nowhere else to be." She did not tell Isla that morning. She picked her up from the neighbors and made lunch and sat across from her daughter at the small kitchen table and watched Isla eat half a grilled cheese sandwich with the focused determination of someone who takes food seriously. And she thought about the shape of what came next and felt the weight of it pressing against the inside of her sternum. She called her attorney in the afternoon, explained the situation in the careful, abbreviated way she had learned to explain things when precision mattered more than completeness. Her attorney was quiet on the other end for a moment. "He can establish paternity," the attorney said. "If he pursues it through the courts, you're looking at a process, not a wall." "I know." The question is whether you want to manage this through a process or through a conversation. Those aren't the only two options. They're the two that are actually available to you, the attorney said, not unkindly. He found you once. He'll find you again. Running costs more each time, and the math eventually stops working. Evelyn stood at her kitchen window after she hung up, looking at the narrow street below. It was a cold, bright afternoon, the kind that looks warm from indoors and isn't. A man was walking a dog past the house, a kid on a bike. Ordinary Tuesday afternoon in a city she had chosen precisely for its ordinariness, and she thought about how ordinary things can coexist with extraordinary pressure, the way a house can look fine from the outside while the foundation is doing something catastrophic below grade. She had not told him yes. She had not told him no. She had left portholes with the envelope under her arm, and his number, a new number, different from the blocked one, saved in her phone, and she had said she would think about it, and he had said he would wait, and she had walked the 6 blocks home in the cold, salt air, and thought about nothing at all, with the focused deliberateness of a woman saving her thinking for when she had more room for it. She thought about it now. All of it. The photographs and the footage and the financial records and the witness statement and the specific look on his face when she said Isla's name for the first time in front of him, the way something in him went absolutely still in the way that only happens when a person receives information that reorganizes something structural. She thought about 3 years of certainty and whether certainty that is built on incomplete information is the same as being wrong. She was not ready to answer that question. But she was running out of time in which the question could remain unanswered. The call came at 11:15 that night. Not Lucian. A different number, one she didn't recognize, and she almost didn't answer it. But she had been awake since 8, sitting in the dark living room with a glass of water she'd refilled twice without drinking. And when the phone lit up the room, she reached for it on instinct. The voice on the other end was a woman's, calm, almost pleasant. "Mrs. Cade," she said, "or whatever you're calling yourself now." Evelyn's whole body went cold and then very, very still. "I think it's time we spoke," the woman said. "I imagine your husband has been very busy explaining things to you. I thought you might benefit from a second perspective." "Who is this?" Evelyn said. Her voice came out even. She was proud of that. "Someone who knows quite a lot about how Lucian Cade tells stories," the woman said. "And quite a lot about you. And quite a lot about that little girl asleep in the next room." The air in the apartment felt different suddenly, thicker. Evelyn stood up from the couch and moved to Isla's doorway in the dark, her phone still pressed to her ear, and looked in at her daughter, Benny under one arm, chest rising and falling, completely at peace. "What do you want?" Evelyn said. "A conversation," the woman said. "In person. Tomorrow. I'll send you an address." "And if I don't come?" The woman paused, just long enough. "Then I'll have to find other ways to make sure you have complete information," she said. "And I'd rather not do that. I think you'd rather I didn't do that either." The call ended. Evelyn stood in the doorway of her daughter's room with the phone in her hand and the screen going dark and the nightlight casting its small, steady glow over Isla's sleeping face, and understood in that moment that she was standing at the exact center of something that had been closing around her for much longer than she knew, and that every choice she made from this point forward would either open a door or seal one shut permanently, and that she did not know, could not yet know, which doors were which. She looked at her daughter, she made herself breathe, and then she texted Lucian a single line. "Someone called me. A woman. She knows about Isla." The response came in less than 40 seconds, 3 words that told her everything she needed to know about how serious the situation had just become. "Do not go." She didn't sleep again. This was becoming a pattern she couldn't afford. The sleeplessness accumulating the way debt does, quietly and then all at once, and she was aware that her judgment was operating on a deficit that made everything slightly more dangerous than it would otherwise be. She sat on the couch in the dark after Lucian's text, and she read those 3 words, "Do not go," approximately 11 times, and each time she read them, they meant something slightly different, which was the problem with Lucian's language, which had always been the problem with Lucian's language. "Do not go because it's dangerous. Do not go because I need to handle this myself. Do not go because I know who this woman is, and I am not yet ready to tell you what I know." She typed back, "Who is she?" The response took 4 minutes, which was long for Lucien, who she remembered as someone who always knew what he wanted to say before he said it. Her name is Jin Seo. She is the daughter of the man who ran the operation I told you about. She is not someone you should be in a room with alone. Evelyn stared at the name. Jin Seo. She said it quietly to herself in the dark apartment, not for any particular reason, just to give it weight, to make it real. The daughter of the family that had staged the scene in Seoul. The woman, or the family, who had watched Evelyn walk out of a hotel room in Seoul and calculated correctly that she wouldn't go back. She typed. She said she has a second perspective on how you tell stories. Lucien, she would say that. Evelyn. Is she lying? The pause this time was longer. 6 minutes. She watched the screen. Isla made a sound in the other room, not waking, just shifting, the small, unconscious adjustments of a child deep in sleep. And Evelyn's attention split between the phone and the monitor with the particular bifurcated alertness of a mother whose nervous system has been recalibrated by 3 years of single parenthood. The response came in 2 parts, 30 seconds apart. First, not entirely. Then, I need to see you in person before you decide anything. Tonight, if you'll let me. She looked at the time, 11:42. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the name Jin Seo still visible on the screen above the conversation. She typed, "Come to the back door," quietly. He arrived in 18 minutes, which told her he had not been far. She registered that without comment, filed it in the part of her mind that was tracking the growing inventory of things she was choosing not to address yet, because she only had so much capacity and she was allocating it carefully. She let him in through the kitchen door that opened onto the small alley behind the house. He was wearing the same gray coat. He looked like a man who had not slept either, though on him it manifested differently, not as vulnerability but as a kind of compressed tension, like a spring that has been wound past its comfortable range. He came in and she closed the door behind him and did not offer him anything to sit down on because she needed this to be a conversation that could end quickly if it needed to. "Tell me about her," Evelyn said. No preamble. She had learned this from him, actually, the directness. And she was aware of the irony, but set it aside. Lucien stood just inside the door, with his hands in his coat pockets. Jin Seo is 29. She took over management of her family's operations after her father's arrest 18 months ago. She is significantly more sophisticated than her father was, and significantly less patient. He paused. She was the one who planned Seoul, not her father. She was 26, and she designed the entire operation. Evelyn felt something cold move through her chest. She planned it. Yes, a 26-year-old planned the thing that ended my marriage. The thing that she intended to end my marriage, Lucien said. The distinction matters. Does it feel like it matters? Evelyn said. He didn't answer that, which was its own kind of answer. Why is she contacting me now? Evelyn said. Why not 3 years ago? Why not when she found out I was pregnant, if she had people watching you and people watching me? Why now? Because now I'm here, he said. I came to find you, which means I've shown her where you are and confirmed that you matter enough to me to find. She's been waiting for me to do something that would tell her the exact dimensions of what she could use. His jaw tightened in the particular way she remembered from the handful of times during their marriage she had seen him genuinely angry. Not performed anger, but the real thing, which was always quieter. I underestimated how quickly she'd move. You let her here, Evelyn said. The words landed. She watched them land. Yes, he said. She turned away from him and stood at the kitchen counter with her back to him and her hands flat on the cold tile. She looked at the small window above the sink. The alley outside was dark and empty and completely ordinary. She thought about the last 3 years, the careful geography of her new life, the specific work of making herself invisible, the fact that she had done everything right, and the thing that undid it was not a mistake she made, but a decision he made. And she breathed through the anger carefully, the way you breathe through pain, because anger was not going to be useful right now, and she needed to be useful. What does she want from me? Evelyn said, still not looking at him. Leverage, he said, over me. She wants me to understand that she can reach you whenever she chooses, that the distance you built means nothing, that Isla... He stopped. Evelyn turned around. His face had done something she had never seen it do in 4 years of marriage, And whatever it was, it made him look suddenly and uncomplicatedly human in a way that she found more alarming than anything else about this night. "She is not going to use my daughter," Evelyn said, each word separate and very clear. "No," he said, "she's not. I will not allow that." "You don't get to allow or not allow things that happen to my daughter," Evelyn said. "You lost that standing 3 years ago when you—" She stopped herself, recalibrated. This was not the conversation. "What do you need to do to end this?" He looked at her. "I need to meet with her directly. And make her understand that whatever she believes she has, it's not sufficient." "That's not an answer," Evelyn said. "That's the outline of an answer. I need the actual answer." He was quiet for a moment. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, somewhere down the alley, something moved. A cat, probably, or the wind. And both of them turned toward the sound at the same moment and then turned back when it resolved into nothing. "There are things I can give her that she wants more than leverage over you," he said. "Business, territory. I've been holding assets in the Korean market that her family has been trying to access for 6 years. I can give her a path to those and remove the incentive." "You're going to buy her off." "I'm going to give her something that costs me more than you cost her," he said. "Yes." Evelyn looked at him for a long time. "And what does that cost you?" "More than I'll explain tonight," he said. And before she could respond, "Not because I'm hiding it from you, because I don't want to tell you the number and have you tell me it's too much." She understood what that meant. She understood it in the complicated way you understand things about a person you have known for years and loved and been devastated by and not stopped knowing. "Go," she said. "Deal with her. Come back and tell me what you gave her, and I'll decide whether I can live with it." He nodded, moved toward the door, stopped. "Don't meet with her," he said. "Whatever she sends you, whatever address, don't go." "You already told me that." "I'm telling you again," he said. "She's not going to offer you information. She's going to offer you a version of events constructed to produce a specific reaction. She's good at that. That's what she does." He left. Evelyn locked the door behind him and stood in the kitchen for a long time afterward. And then she went to Isla's room and sat in the chair in the corner and watched her daughter sleep until the sky outside began to go gray. The address came at 7:15 in the morning, as promised. A text from the same number. An industrial block near the waterfront, a building that Evelyn looked up and found registered to a holding company that returned no meaningful information. Clean, professionally clean. She did not go. She drove Isla to the neighbor's house, came home, made herself eat half a piece of toast and drink actual coffee, and sat at her kitchen table with her phone face down and waited for Lucien to contact her and tell her it was handled. By noon, she had not heard from him. By 2 o'clock, she had called the number he'd given her 3 times and received no answer. By 3:30, she was standing in her kitchen with her coat on and her keys in her hand, and a sensation in her chest that she recognized as the specific nauseating anxiety of knowing something is wrong and having no information about what or how wrong. She called the one number she still had from before, a man named Garrett, who had been Lucien's head of security for 7 years, and who had met Evelyn at 4 different events during her marriage, and who she had always liked precisely because he seemed to exist in that world with more discomfort than anyone else in it. She had his number because Lucien had made her memorize it during their 2nd year of marriage, and said if she ever needed help and couldn't reach him, she should call Garrett, and she had rolled her eyes at the time and committed the number to memory anyway because she was not an idiot. Garrett picked up on the second ring. "Mrs. Cade," he said, and his voice told her immediately that he had been expecting this call, which told her something else. "Where is he?" she said. A pause. "He went to the meeting this morning, the one he told you not to attend." Another pause. "We lost contact with him at approximately 9:40. The kitchen tilted slightly. She put her hand on the counter. "Lost contact," she said. "Yes, ma'am?" "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means his phone is off, his tracker went dark at a location near the waterfront, and the 2 people I had positioned outside the building reported a vehicle leaving at speed approximately 20 minutes into his meeting, and he was not, Garrett stopped, chose the next words carefully. "He was not among the people they could visually confirm." "You're telling me he went into that building and didn't come out?" "I'm telling you we don't have confirmation of his current location," Garrett said. which was the same thing said differently, and she understood that he was managing her and she did not have time to be managed. Who has him? She said. We believe Jin Seo's people moved him to a secondary location during the meeting. We're working on identifying. How long? She said. How long until you find him? We're working as fast as... Garrett. Her voice came out with an edge she hadn't used in 3 years, hadn't needed to use in 3 years, the edge that came from 4 years of being Lucian Cade's wife and learning what tone carried weight in that world. How long? A silence. Then, we don't know. She hung up. She sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically. Her legs simply made the decision before she did, folding underneath her until she was sitting on the hardwood with her back against the cabinet and her keys still in her hand and the terrible, clarifying stillness of someone whose immediate options have just been reduced to almost nothing. She went through what she knew. Lucian had gone to meet Jin Seo. He had told Evelyn not to go, had gone himself instead, because he believed he had something to offer that would resolve the situation, and either he had been wrong about that or he had walked into something he couldn't offer his way out of. Jin Seo had taken him. That was the clean word for it. Taken, though she was aware of the range of things that word could contain. His people didn't know where he was. His tracker was dark. The building near the waterfront was empty, or appeared to be, and Jin Seo had sent Evelyn an address that morning. She looked at the text on her phone. The address was still there. The text had been sent at 7:15, more than 2 hours before Lucian arrived at his own meeting, which meant Jin Seo had sent the address to Evelyn before she knew whether Lucian was going to show up, which meant the address was not a contingency. It was always the plan. 2 meetings, 2 locations, morning and afternoon, designed to run simultaneously or sequentially depending on who showed up where. She was meant to go to the waterfront building. Lucien was meant to go somewhere else, or to show up at the same building and be removed before Evelyn arrived. Either way, Jin Seo had wanted Evelyn in that building without Lucian's knowledge of it. And Lucian walking in and trying to deal with it directly had disrupted the first part of that plan, but not necessarily neutralized the whole thing. The address was still live. That was the thing. Jin Seo had not withdrawn it, had not sent a follow-up, had said nothing, which meant she was waiting. Evelyn got up off the floor. She changed into clothes that were harder wearing than what she'd been in. Boots, dark jeans, a thick sweater. She called the neighbor and asked if Isla could stay through dinner. And when the neighbor said, "Of course, honey, is everything okay?" she said, "Yes, just a work thing. Thank you." She stood in front of the small mirror in the hallway and looked at herself for a moment. Not out of vanity, but out of the same impulse that makes you check your equipment before you walk into uncertain terrain. She looked tired. She looked like herself. She picked up the envelope Lucian had given her yesterday. The documentation, the photographs, the financial records, and she put it in her bag. Then she picked up her phone and she called the address text back, and it rang 4 times and went to a voicemail that was not set up. And she hung up. And she typed instead, "I'm coming. 1 hour." The response came back in under a minute. "I know." The building near this waterfront was not what she expected, which she recognized was exactly the point. It was not threatening from the outside. A converted warehouse, the kind that gets turned into event space or light manufacturing, the kind that has a perfectly legitimate face and a back section that nobody ever looks at. The street in front of it was ordinary. A van parked across the road, a restaurant supply truck idling at the corner. She walked past the building once before going in, not because she had a security protocol, but because she needed 30 seconds to settle her breathing. Her breathing was not settling. She went in anyway. The interior was large and partially lit and smelled like concrete and cold air and something else underneath that she couldn't name. A woman was standing in the center of the space at a table that held a laptop and 2 water bottles and a manila folder, and the woman was younger than Evelyn expected and better dressed and had the particular composed stillness of someone who has been waiting and is not bothered by the waiting. Jin Seo looked at her the way you look at something you have thought about for a long time and are now finally seen in person. "You came," she said. "Where is my husband?" Evelyn said. "Safe," Jin Seo said. "For now, please." She gestured at the chair on the other side of the table. "Sit down. I'm not going to waste your time." Evelyn did not sit down. "Tell me where he is." "I will," Jin Seo said. "After we talk." And I need you to understand that what I'm about to show you is not a manipulation. I know Lucien told you I would say something constructed to produce a reaction. He would say that because it's what he would do. She opened the manila folder on the table and turned it so the contents faced Evelyn. Look at this, and then tell me what you want to do. Evelyn looked. Photographs. Different from the ones left on her kitchen table. These were not surveillance images of her daily life. These were documents, financial records, wire transfers, dates and amounts, and account numbers and corresponding notations that she read, with the careful, systematic attention she brought to everything, and whose meaning became clear to her within approximately 90 seconds. Wire transfers from an account she recognized. Lucien's account. She recognized the account structure from 4 years of access to their shared finances. Transfers to a logistics company she didn't recognize. Dated across a period of roughly 8 months, starting approximately 6 months before the Seoul trip. Payments. Regular, structured. The kind of regularity that means not a transaction, but an arrangement. She looked up at Jin Seo. What is this? She said. And she was proud again of how flat her voice was, of how little of the vertigo she was experiencing actually reached the surface. The logistics company is a shell, Jin Seo said. It was used for exactly one thing during those 8 months, moving people across borders without documentation. She paused. Specifically, moving women. Specifically, for clients who paid very well and asked no questions. The room was very quiet. You're saying Lucien? Evelyn stopped. I'm saying those are his transfers, Jin Seo said. I'm saying the company those transfers went to was doing exactly one thing. I'm saying that the documentation I showed you yesterday, the kind and thorough documentation he prepared for your coffee shop meeting, does not include these records, because he didn't give you these records. Evelyn looked at the transfers again, looked at the dates, looked at the account number that she knew as well as she knew her own address. Why are you showing me this? She said. Because you deserve to know what you went back to, Jin Seo said. Because 3 years ago I made sure you walked away from a man, and whether my reasons were pure or not, the result was that you and your daughter were protected from something. And now he's here. And you are considering... She stopped. I'm not your enemy, Mrs. Cade. I need you to consider that possibility. Evelyn's hands were very cold. She pressed them flat on the table, the same gesture Lucien had made yesterday in the coffee shop, and she looked at the documents and she felt the ground beneath the careful structure she had been building all morning. The theory of what was happening, the framework that had Lucien as the one in danger and her as the one who needed to help. She felt it shift in a way that was slow and total and reminded her of nothing so much as the moment in Seoul when a hotel door had opened onto a scene she hadn't been prepared for. She thought about the things Lucien had said last night, the things he had been willing to give Jin Seo in exchange for leverage, assets he wouldn't name, costs he didn't want Evelyn to tell him were too high, things he would not explain tonight. She thought about the documentation he had brought to Portholes, thorough, convincing, boringly specific. She thought about a man who had spent 20 years building an empire and who understood better than almost anyone alive how to build something that looked like truth. She looked at Jin Seo. Where is he? She said. Safe, Jin Seo said again. I have no interest in harming him. I have interest in him understanding that I am not a problem he can resolve by throwing money or territory at, and I have interest in you understanding the full picture before you decide whose version of this story you believe. She closed the folder, a calm, unhurried gesture. You can take those documents. You can have someone verify them independently. You can decide they're fabricated. That's your right. Her voice was even and unhurried. But I think you came here today because some part of you already knows that the envelope he gave you was complete in exactly the way a carefully prepared envelope would be complete, and what it didn't contain might matter as much as what it did. The cold air in the warehouse pressed against Evelyn's skin. She could feel her own heartbeat in her throat, which she recognized as her body's response to the specific and particular horror of not knowing, again, whether the ground she was standing on was real. She had been here before. She had been in this exact condition, standing in a strange space holding evidence she couldn't fully trust about a man she couldn't fully read. And the last time she had been here, she had walked away, and the walking away had cost her 3 years of her life. She picked up the folder. I want to speak to him, she said. Right now. On the phone. Jinseo reached into her jacket pocket and produced a phone and set it on the table. Evelyn picked it up. The screen showed an active call already running. She put it to her ear and said his name. He answered immediately. His voice was controlled and careful in the way that it was when he was in a situation he was managing, rather than a situation he was in freely. And he said her name, and then he said, "Evelyn, whatever she's shown you, I need you to listen to me before—" "I will," she said. "But first I need you to tell me about the Meridian Logistics transfers." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted 4 seconds. She counted them. 4 seconds was a very long time for a man who always knew what he wanted to say. "Evelyn," he started. "Tell me what they were for," she said. Her voice was still flat, still controlled. It was costing her something extraordinary to keep it that way, but she was paying the cost because she needed the answer, and she needed to be able to hear it clearly, without the noise of her own reaction getting in the way. Another silence, shorter this time, and then, quietly, with the specific tone of a man who has reached the end of a road he built himself. "It's more complicated than what she's showing you. It's more complicated. Not a denial, not an explanation, a deferral." She had heard Lucian Cade use language precisely and sparingly for 4 years of marriage, and she understood with absolute and devastating clarity that a man who could produce a 14-page documented account of a conspiracy against him, who could bring security footage and financial records and witness testimony to a coffee shop meeting, who had spent 14 months finding her and 20 more months deciding what to do about it, that man could have said anything other than "it's more complicated." If "it's more complicated" was not the truest thing available to him in that moment. The phone stayed at her ear. The warehouse was cold and quiet. Jinseo was watching her with the patient attention of someone who has placed a bet and is waiting for the outcome with the confidence of someone who already knows how odds work. And Evelyn Ashford, who had survived Seoul and Portland and 3 years of solitude and a birth with no one in the room, who had built a life out of careful decisions and honest work, and the particular kind of stubbornness that sometimes looks like strength and sometimes just is. Evelyn Ashford stood in a warehouse near the waterfront in the city she had chosen for its ordinariness and understood that she was not, had never been, at the edge of this thing. She was standing at the center of it, and everything she thought she knew about which way was out had just stopped being reliable. She lowered the phone, not hung it up, lowered it, slowly, until it was at her side, and Lucien's voice was still coming out of the speaker, small and distant, and saying her name, saying Evelyn, saying wait. And she stood in the cold warehouse with the folder in one hand and the phone in the other, and she made a decision that felt less like a choice and more like something that had already happened, and she was only now catching up to it. She set the phone face down on the table. Jinseo watched her do it, didn't say anything. "I want to see him," Evelyn said, "in person, right now. Not on a phone." I'm not negotiating." Her voice came out harder than she intended, or maybe exactly as hard as she intended. She wasn't sure anymore where the control ended and the actual feeling began. "You brought me here because you want something from me. I don't know yet what that is, but I'm not going to make any decision about anything until I have seen my husband with my own eyes and confirmed that he is what you say he is, which is safe." She looked at Jinseo directly. "Take me to him." Something shifted in Jinseo's expression. Not quite surprise, but an adjustment, the recalibration of someone who planned for several outcomes and is now determining which one is in play. "All right," she said. They drove 15 minutes in a black car with tinted windows and a driver who did not speak. Jinseo sat beside Evelyn in the back seat and looked at her phone and said nothing, which Evelyn appreciated because she needed the 15 minutes to do something with the information currently occupying every available surface inside her skull. The transfers, the dates, the account she recognized. She had been through their finances during their marriage, not forensically, not with suspicion, but with the ordinary familiarity of two people who share a life and a bank, and the understanding that money is a practical matter that requires occasional practical attention. She had seen that account. She knew its shape. She knew the kinds of transactions it typically produced. She also knew that Lucian had operating accounts she didn't have visibility into. She had known that and accepted it as part of the arrangement she had made with herself about what she needed to know and what she could afford not to. And she was sitting with that now, sitting with the fact that the architecture of her willful not knowing had not protected her from anything. It had simply deferred the cost. It's more complicated than what she's showing you. She turned those words over, looked at them from different angles the way she looked at a piece she was trying to authenticate. What did complicated mean when spoken by a man who had just produced a comprehensive documented account of a 3-year conspiracy? Complicated as in the records are fabricated. Complicated as in the records are real, but the context changes their meaning. Complicated as in yes, but not in the way it looks? She had no way to know. That was the truth of it. She was operating without sufficient information in a situation where the people with sufficient information had opposing interests, and the only thing she could verify with certainty right now was the physical fact of Lucian himself, which was why she needed to see him, and which was why she had asked to be taken to him, rather than standing in a warehouse trying to reason through a problem that couldn't be reasoned through without more data. The car stopped. A second building. Smaller than the warehouse, a brick structure that could have been a storage facility or a private workshop. She didn't recognize the street. She noted the cross streets as they got out of the car, filed them in case she needed them later. 2 men stood outside the door, neither of whom looked at her directly. Jinseo said something brief to one of them in Korean, and he stepped aside. Inside. A hallway. A door on the left. Jinseo stopped in front of it. "He's not restrained," she said. "I want you to know that. He came willingly when we asked him to come here from the first building. He understood the situation." "Open the door," Evelyn said. Jinseo opened it. The room was small and lit by a single overhead fixture that gave everything a flat, overexposed quality. A table, 2 chairs, a window with the glass frosted so you couldn't see out. Lucien was standing at the window with his back to the door when they came in, and he turned when he heard her, and his face did several things in rapid succession. Relief, which was immediate and unguarded, followed by something else, something more complicated and more costly. The face of a man who has been waiting to have a conversation he knows is going to damage him. He looked at the folder in her hand. "Evelyn, sit down," she said. He sat. She remained standing. She put the folder on the table between them, not open, just there, and she pulled the chair out on her side but didn't sit in it, stood behind it with her hands on the back, using it as something to grip. She was aware of Jin Seo behind her, still in the doorway. She turned. "I need you to give us the room," she said. "I don't think—" "Give us the room," Evelyn said. "Whatever happens in this conversation is between him and me, and has been between him and me since before you were involved in it. You've done what you came to do. The rest of this is not yours." Jin Seo looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Lucien. Some communication passed between them that Evelyn could feel but not decode. And then Jin Seo stepped back and pulled the door most of the way closed, leaving a gap of approximately 3 inches that Evelyn chose not to address because she didn't have the energy to fight for every inch right now. She turned back to Lucien. "Tell me about the transfers," she said. "I need you to understand the context." "Lucien." She pressed her weight down into her hands on the chair back. "I have been awake for approximately 30 hours. I have a daughter who is at a neighbor's house and who I need to get back to before she starts asking questions I am not ready to answer. I have spent the last 4 days being managed by you and managed by her, and I am finished being managed. Tell me about the transfers." He looked at her. He looked like himself, controlled, contained, the particular brand of self-possession that had always read to her as strength, and which she was now questioning. Again, the same way you question something you've looked at for so long it stops looking real. "The logistics company was real," he said. "The transfers were real." He held her gaze. "The characterization she gave you is not." "What was it used for?" "Moving people," he said. "Across borders, without documentation." The words landed exactly the way they had in the warehouse. She breathed. "Lucien!" "Intelligence assets," he said. "Specifically, people who had provided information to a federal task force and who needed to be relocated without using official channels because the official channels had been compromised." He leaned forward slightly. "I was contracted. There is a federal agent whose name I am not going to say in this room who can confirm this, and who asked me not to produce this documentation publicly because the operation is ongoing." He paused. "I could not put those records in the envelope I gave you because those records implicate people who are still in the field. Mbar sexy." Evelyn stared at him. "You're telling me you were working with federal law enforcement," she said, "for a portion of that period?" "Yes." "While running?" "It's not a clean line," he said. "I understand how it sounds. I'm not presenting it as clean. I am telling you what the transfers were actually for." She pulled the chair out and sat down. She needed to be sitting. The standing was costing her more than she had. "Why didn't you tell me this last night?" she said. "When I asked." "You said it was complicated." "Because I needed to verify first that Jin So had shown you specifically those records and not something else." His hands were on the table, flat and still. "I needed to know exactly what version of events I was responding to." She looked at him. She looked at his hands. She looked at the folder between them. "I want to believe you," she said. The words came out quiet and very raw, and she let them be that because there was nothing left in her that could pretend otherwise. "I need you to understand how much I want to believe you, and why that wanting is its own problem. Because I have been here before, not in this room, but in this exact position, holding something and trying to decide if it's real. And the last time I was here, I made a decision, and that decision cost me 3 years of my life, and a daughter who grew up without a father, and I cannot—" She stopped. Her throat had tightened in a way she refused to accommodate. "I cannot make that mistake again, in either direction." Lucian said nothing. He was watching her with the full, unwavering attention she had described to her sister once, early in their marriage, as the most unsettling and most intimate thing about him. The way he made you feel like the most important thing in the room, which was not always comfortable. "Give me something I can verify," she said. "Independently, without going through you or through her. Give me one thing that can be checked." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said a name, a federal agent's name, a division, a case number, which he recited from memory in the precise, unhurried way he recited everything, and she wrote it on the inside cover of the folder with a pen she found in her bag. "If I call that number," she said. "They will confirm it," he said. "They'll need to run it through their verification process, which takes 24 to 48 hours. But they will confirm it." She looked at what she'd written. She looked at him. And then the door opened. Not the 3-inch gap, but fully open, and Jin So came back into the room with a different quality of energy than she'd had before. Something accelerated, something that tightened the air. "We have a problem," Jin So said. "You said 10 minutes, Evelyn said. "I know what I said." She was looking at Lucien. "3 of your people just entered the building, armed." Lucien stood up. "I didn't call them," he said. "I know you didn't," Jin So said. "Garrett did. He's been tracking Evelyn's phone since this morning, and he brought people." Evelyn thought about Garrett, thought about the call she'd made to him, thought about the fact that she had told him she didn't know Lucien's location, and he had said we're working on it, and she had not thought to ask how they were working on it or what resources they would deploy if they found it. "How many?" Lucien said. 3 confirmed, possibly more outside." "Are they going to come in hot?" "I have 4 people in this building," Jin So said. Her voice was very controlled. "Your man has 3. The arithmetic is not the problem. The problem is the location, and what happens to her if this goes sideways in an enclosed space." She looked at Evelyn. "I need you to call them off." "I'm not—" Evelyn started. "You have Garrett's number," Lucien said. He was already at the door, looking down the hallway. "Call him. Tell him to stand down. Tell him I'm fine. And if I call him and he asks me to walk out right now." Lucien turned back to look at her. Something moved between them across the small room. Not a conversation, something faster and older than conversation. The shorthand of 2 people who have shared a life and can transmit certain things without language. "Then you walk out," he said. "I'm not keeping you here." "That's not the question," she said. "The question is whether I leave before this is finished." "The case number," he said. "Call it. 24 hours. Then make your decision." She picked up her phone. She called Garrett. He answered in 1 ring, which confirmed he had been sitting on the call, and she said his name and she said, "Lucien is safe, and I need you to stand your people down right now and stay outside." There was a pause during which she heard him breathe and recalibrate, and then he said, "Yes, ma'am." And the line stayed open for a moment longer as if he was waiting for her to add something, and she didn't add anything, and he disconnected. She looked at Jin Seo. "Done." Jinseo said something in Korean to someone Evelyn couldn't see. A door somewhere in the building opened and closed. The room went quiet. And then Lucien said, quietly and without warning, "Why did you come here?" For a moment she thought he was talking to her. Then she realized he was looking at Jinseo. "I told you why," Jinseo said. "You told her why," Lucien said. "You gave her a version." His voice had the quality of something being deliberately held at a low temperature. "I'm asking you directly. What is this actually about?" Jinseo looked at him. For the first time since Evelyn had walked into the warehouse, something in the younger woman's composure showed its infrastructure, the deliberate effort beneath the stillness. "Your people killed my father's second," she said. "Not during the arrest. After. In custody." The room was very quiet. "I know," Lucien said. "You knew." "I found out 4 months ago," he said. "It wasn't sanctioned. The man responsible is no longer with my organization." "He's not with any organization," Jinseo said, and her voice had finally lost its surface smoothness. "He died in a car accident 3 months ago. Brake failure." She looked at Lucien with something that was not quite accusation but was made of the same material. "Very convenient timing." "It was not my decision," Lucien said. "I want that to be clear." "Then whose?" "Someone who thought they were protecting me," he said, "and who didn't consult me, and who I dealt with through other means when I found out." He paused. "I understand if you don't believe that." "I don't," she said, flat, clean. "But it doesn't change what I have to offer you. You don't have anything to offer me. I have the name of the person on your staff who is currently feeding information about your daughter's location to 2 separate groups who are not me and whose intentions toward your family are not as restrained as mine." She let that land. Watched it land. "That's what I actually came here to trade." The silence in the room had a different quality now. Evelyn watched Lucien's face process this, and she watched him arrive, step by step, at the same conclusion she was arriving at, that the play Jinseo had made was not the play they'd thought it was, that the leverage in the warehouse and the documents had been a delivery mechanism for this one specific piece of information, and that the reason she had needed to deliver it this way rather than simply calling was something to do with the architecture of credibility, with the need to establish that she had teeth before she offered to use them on someone else's behalf. "Who?" Lucien said. "Garrett," Jinseo said. The word dropped into the room and everything reorganized around it. Evelyn's hand tightened on her phone, the phone she had just used to call Garrett, and tell him exactly where they were, and confirm that Lucien was in this building and that she was staying. The phone Garrett had been tracking since morning, the call she'd made to him from her kitchen when she didn't know where Lucien was, which told him she didn't know, which told him they were not in contact, which told him whatever he needed to know about the state of things. Lucien turned to look at her. His face was doing something she had never seen on it before. Not panic. Lucien didn't panic, but the controlled, rapid interior recalculation of a man whose trust has just been weaponized in a way he didn't see coming. "How long?" he said to Jinseo. 14 months, she said. "Since before you found her. He's the one who confirmed her location in the first place. He's been providing updates to 2 families, not for money, for immunity. He has exposure from an operation in 2019 that one of those families controls the evidence of." She paused. "He's been paying them with information about you. 14 months. Evelyn ran the timeline. 14 months ago, Lucien had known where she was. He had known because Garrett told him, except Garrett had been telling other people the same thing simultaneously, and those other people had been deciding what to do with the information while Lucien was deciding how to approach it cleanly, and the photographs in her kitchen. "The photographs," she said aloud. Both of them looked at her. "You said you sent the photographs," she said to Lucien, "to get me off balance enough to answer the phone." A pause. "I said my people left the photographs," he said carefully. "Did Garrett arrange the photographs?" Another pause. 3 seconds. 4. "I don't know," he said. And his not knowing was itself information, because Lucien Cade knew the provenance of actions taken in his name, and if he didn't know it was because he hadn't verified it, and if he hadn't verified it was because he had trusted the person he was trusting to handle the details. "The 2 families Garrett's been feeding information to," Evelyn said to Jinseo. "Where are they right now?" Jinseo checked her phone. Her expression did not change, but something in her posture altered. A microfracture in the composure. "That's what I'm trying to find out," she said. "You said Garrett's people are outside this building," Evelyn said. "3 confirmed. And the families he's been providing information to, they know this location because Garrett tracked my phone here." "Yes." "So if they move on this location, they move on all of us," Jinso said. Lucien was already moving. He crossed to the door in 3 steps and pulled it fully open and said something fast and low to someone in the hallway. And Evelyn heard the sound of people moving in the building, the particular organized urgency of people who know what to do in situations like this, which she did not, which meant she needed to stay close to someone who did. She stood up from the chair. She picked up the folder and put it in her bag. She looked at the room, the flat light, the frosted window, the table with 2 chairs, and she thought with sudden, vivid clarity about Isla at the neighbor's house drawing horses on construction paper. Isla, who did not know her father's name, or that her mother was standing in a room that was about to become considerably more dangerous than it had been 10 minutes ago. Lucien appeared back in the doorway. He looked at her. "We need to move," he said. "I know. There's a back exit. Car outside. We go now, together, before—" A sound from the front of the building. Not a knock. The particular sound of a door being opened by people who are not asking permission, followed by voices and the specific acoustic quality of a space that has abruptly filled with more bodies than it was holding before. Lucien's hand found her arm. Not roughly, firm, directional. She did not shake it off. Jinso was already moving down the hallway away from the front, pulling the door at the end open, and Evelyn was moving too, because the alternative to moving was standing still, and standing still was the one option she was certain she couldn't afford. They went through the back and into a narrow service corridor and then through a metal door that opened into cold air and the smell of salt water and the gray light of a November afternoon that was darker than it should have been at this hour. And Evelyn understood a moment later that the darkness was a vehicle. A large, dark vehicle pulled flush against the building's rear wall, blocking the light, the engine already running. Lucien's hand still on her arm, guiding her toward the car. She was moving with him, and her brain was running 2 tracks simultaneously. The immediate track, which was get to the car, get into the car, move away from this building, and the other track, which was running the math on everything she now knew and what it meant, and who she was moving toward, and whether the ground beneath her feet was anything like what she'd been told it was. She got into the car. Lucien got in beside her. The door closed. The vehicle moved. Jinseo was in the front. Her phone was at her ear, speaking fast in Korean, and Evelyn watched the building recede through the rear window and saw, as they turned the corner, 2 black cars pulling onto the street from the opposite direction, moving fast, and understood that the timing had been very close, and that close was not the same as safe, and that safe was not a condition she had been in for longer than she had understood. She turned forward. She looked at Lucien beside her. He was looking at her too. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," she said. "Okay. Are you?" "No." They looked at each other in the moving car with the city going past the windows, and the sound of Jinseo's voice in the front seat, and the specific, enormous silence of everything that had not yet been said between them, and everything that would need to be said, and everything that was going to have to change, if any version of what either of them wanted was going to be possible. "The case number," she said. "I'm going to call it." "I know," he said. "And if it checks out, it will check out." "If it checks out," she said again, not letting him shortcut the conditional, because the conditional mattered, because she needed him to understand that she was not already decided, that she was processing in real time with incomplete information and under duress, and that she was not going to pretend otherwise. "Then we're going to have a long conversation about every single thing you have not told me, every piece, not the version you prepared, all of it." He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "And Garrett." His face did something controlled and very cold. "I'll handle Garrett." "I need to know what handle means," she said. "It means he doesn't have access to you or to Isla," he said. "The rest I need you to let me manage." She looked at him. She thought about the 4 seconds of silence on the phone when she had asked about the transfers. She thought about it's more complicated. She thought about the folder in her bag and the case number on the inside cover and the 24 to 48 hours it was going to take to verify it, and what she was going to do with herself and her daughter during those 24 to 48 hours. She thought about a woman's hand on her husband's chest. She thought about a dragon tattoo and a door closing and an elevator in a different hotel 2 blocks away, and a bathroom floor in Seoul. She thought about Isla's face in the nightlight, the stuffed rabbit, the even, untroubled breathing of a child who does not yet know that the world contains things like this. The car moved through the city towards something she couldn't yet see the shape of, and Evelyn Ashford sat beside the man she had married and left, and been looking for a reason to stop grieving, and she did not reach for his hand, and he did not reach for hers. And between them in the back seat of a moving car with the gray November light coming through the windows was the full accumulated weight of everything that had happened and everything that might still happen, pressing against both of them, waiting to see which of them would be the first to say the thing that... The car drove for 23 minutes before anyone spoke again. Evelyn counted them. Not deliberately. Her brain had defaulted to counting the way it sometimes did when everything else was too large to hold, the same way she had counted the hours on the flight to Seoul 3 years ago, pressing her feet against the carry-on bag and watching the numbers change. 23 minutes of city giving way to the quieter outskirts, the buildings thinning, the salt smell of the water strengthening through whatever gap existed in the car's sealed interior. Jin Seo had stopped speaking Korean into her phone approximately 8 minutes in and had been sitting with it face down on her knees since then, looking at the road ahead with the particular stillness of someone running calculations in a part of her mind that didn't require her face. Lucien was looking out of his window. Evelyn was looking at her hands. She had the folder in her bag. She had the case number on the inside cover. She had 24 to 48 hours of verification standing between her and the next decision, and she was trying to let that be enough structure to rest against. But the rest of her mind would not cooperate, kept cycling back through the room, in the brick building and the transfers and the 4 seconds of silence, and Garrett's name falling out of Jin Seo's mouth like something that had been waiting a long time to be dropped. Garrett, who had been with Lucien for 7 years, who Lucien had trusted enough to give his wife's emergency contact number, who had been selling their location for 14 months to people whose interest in Lucien's family was not benign. She thought about the 2 black cars she'd seen turning onto the street as they pulled away. She thought about how close had been. "Where are we going?" she said. "Safe house," Jin Seo said from the front. First words in 20 minutes. "Outside the city. 1 night, maybe 2, until we understand the exposure." "My daughter," Evelyn said. "She's at your neighbor's house," Jin Seo said. "She's not connected to what happened today. They don't know about her specifically. Garrett's information was about you and Lucien, not the child." Evelyn absorbed this without letting herself feel the relief of it yet, because relief required a stability she didn't have access to. "She needs to stay there tonight without knowing anything is wrong. Call her," Lucien said. He was looking at her now, not the window. "Call the neighbor, whatever you need to say," she called. The neighbor answered on the second ring with the warm, uncomplicated voice of a woman who had been kindly absorbing the overflow of Evelyn's complicated life for 2 years without asking for an explanation. Evelyn told her there was a work situation, an unexpected overnight. She was so sorry, she would explain fully tomorrow. "Was it all right?" The neighbor said, "Of course, honey. Isla's fine. She's asleep on the couch." And Evelyn said thank you in a voice that she kept level by the effort of will that was becoming her dominant mode of operation, and hung up. She looked at the phone in her hand for a moment. Then she put it in her bag. "Okay," she said. To no one in particular. To the situation. The safe house was a low, wide building set back from a coastal road with beach grass on both sides, and the sound of the ocean audible through the walls. Inside it was clean and impersonal in the way that places maintained for specific practical purposes always are. Adequate furniture, adequate light, a kitchen stocked with things that kept. Someone had been here recently. There was a half-empty coffee pot and a coat on a hook that didn't belong to anyone present. Jin Seo made calls from the back room. Lucien spoke briefly with 2 of her people outside and came back in and sat at the kitchen table. And Evelyn stood at the window that faced the ocean and looked at the water going dark in the late afternoon and thought about what she needed to say and how to say it without either of them getting lost in the saying of it. She turned around. "Tell me about Garrett," she said. Lucien had his hands flat on the table. He looked tired, not the compressed, functional tiredness she'd observed in him since his arrival in her city, but something deeper and more structural. The tiredness of a man who has been maintaining a very large and complicated load for a very long time and has just received information that requires him to revise the weight distribution entirely. "What do you want to know?" he said. "When did you start to suspect him?" A pause. 3 weeks ago. Small things. Timing discrepancies. Information getting out that had limited vectors." He looked at the table. "I didn't want it to be him. I've known him for 7 years. What happens to him now?" Lucien looked up at her. "He disappears from my operation. His exposure gets handled through the families he was feeding. I'll offer them something that costs less than continued conflict and makes Garrett's usefulness to them obsolete." He paused. "He doesn't get hurt. I'm not in the business of hurting people who are trying to protect themselves, even badly." She looked at him. "Is that true?" "Which part?" "The part where you're not in the business of hurting people." The question sat between them. He didn't flinch from it, and he didn't answer it quickly, and she gave him credit for both. "I have done things," he said, "that I would not do now. Some of what I built was built on foundations that I understood were wrong while I was laying them, and I laid them anyway because I was a different kind of man and I wanted different things." He looked at her directly. "I can't give you a clean accounting. I can tell you what I'm willing to change and what I'm not willing to do anymore, and you can decide whether that's enough." "What are you willing to change?" she said. "Everything structural," he said. "The organization, the operations. I've been unwinding it for 8 months. Not because of you. I started before I knew about Isla. I started because I was tired of what it cost to maintain it." He paused. "But finding out about her accelerated the clarity." "You've been dismantling your own empire for 8 months, she said. "Yes." "And you didn't mention this." "I mentioned it last night. I said I had things I was giving Jinso that were worth more than leverage. That was part of what I meant." He looked at her. "I'm getting out, Evelyn. Not for you. I need you to understand that the sequence matters. I started getting out before I knew you were here, before I knew about Isla. I'm not doing it as a transaction. I'm doing it because I spent 20 years building something I thought I needed and figured out it was making me someone I didn't want to be." She pulled the chair out across from him and sat down. The kitchen was quiet around them. Outside, the ocean was doing what oceans do, indifferent and continuous. "The federal operation," she said. "The transfers. Real," he said. "The case number will verify. The agent's name will verify. It took 18 months and it's ongoing, and I cannot give you details, but the framework Jinseo showed you is accurate in its components and false in its implication, which is a thing she did deliberately and which I don't entirely blame her for because it got us to this table." "She wanted us talking," Evelyn said. "She wanted Garrett exposed," he said. "She needed me to hear it from a position where I couldn't dismiss it, which meant she needed you in the room, which meant she needed to establish enough credibility with you to get you there." He paused. "She used the transfers because she knew I hadn't shown them to you, and she knew that gap would create enough doubt to make you listen." A beat. "She's good." "She's 29, Evelyn said. "Yes," he said. "She is." They sat with that for a moment. "Her father's man," Evelyn said. "The one who died in custody." "That happened," he said. "The man who arranged it acted without my authorization. I found out. I removed him from the operation, and 3 months later he died in an accident that I did not arrange and cannot prove I didn't arrange, which is one of the costs of the world I've been living in. Things happen in my proximity, and the question of my responsibility is never entirely clean." He held her gaze. "I told her the truth about it tonight. She doesn't fully believe me. I understand why." "Do you think she'll let it go?" "I think she's pragmatic," he said. "I think she came here wanting information about Garrett more than she wanted revenge for her father's man, because she's a businesswoman, not a grieving daughter, or she's both and she knows which one to lead with." He paused. "I think we have an arrangement that is uncomfortable for both of us and functional for both of us, which in my experience is the most durable kind." Evelyn looked at him for a long time. She looked at the lines near his eyes that might have been new or might have always been there, and she still didn't know. She looked at his hands on the table. The same hands, the same particular quality of stillness that had once made her feel like she was in the presence of someone who knew something fundamental about how to be in the world. She had not stopped thinking that during 3 years of separation, which was its own kind of information about herself she had been avoiding. I need to tell you something, she said. He waited. When I left Seoul, she said, I told myself I was protecting Isla from your world and from what your world would do to her life. And that was true. It was a real reason. She looked at the table, then back at him. But there was another reason that I didn't let myself look at directly until tonight, sitting in the back of that car. I left because it was easier than asking. She felt the words cost her something as they came out. I saw something that looked like the thing I was most afraid of, and I left before you could tell me I was wrong. Because if you told me I was wrong, I would have had to stay, and staying was harder than leaving. She looked at him. I have been very angry at you for 3 years. Some of that anger was yours to carry, and some of it was mine. I'm telling you that now because I think we can't go forward without it being said. The kitchen was very quiet. Lucien looked at her with the full, unshielded attention she remembered, and she held it this time rather than looking away. I should have come after you the same day, he said. I should have gotten on a plane and knocked on every door in New York until I found you. And I didn't. And the reason I didn't is the same shape as what you just described. I was afraid that if I came after you and you still didn't believe me, it would mean something I wasn't ready to know. He stopped. I let my fear make decisions that your fear then had to live with. I understand that. I'm not asking you to forgive it tonight. I'm not offering forgiveness tonight, she said. I know. I'm offering the next conversation, she said, and the one after that, and the one after that. She looked at him steadily. I'm offering the process of deciding whether we can build something that isn't built on what we built before, because what we built before clearly had structural problems neither of us was willing to address. Yes, he said, quiet and without qualification. And Isla, she said, we do that separately from whatever happens between us. Her relationship with you is not contingent on mine. She gets to know her father regardless of what I decide. Yes, he said again. That's what I'm offering, she said. Tonight. That's all I have tonight. He nodded. Just that. And she understood that he understood, which was perhaps the most intimate thing about this conversation, that he received what she was giving without trying to make it larger or push it further than she'd placed it, and that restraint was itself a kind of answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. She called the federal case number the next morning. She stood at the window of the safe house with the ocean flat and pewter gray in the early light, and she used the number Lucien had given her and navigated through 3 transfers and a hold that lasted 11 minutes, and then spoke to a woman who confirmed, in the careful, specific language of someone trained to confirm only what can be confirmed, that the case number she had was associated with an active operation, and that any related financial activity during the period she mentioned would have been part of a sanctioned arrangement, and that she was not able to discuss further details at this time, but that she could note that the concern Mrs. Cade was raising was already part of the operational record and had been reviewed and cleared. She hung up. She stood at the window for a while. Then she went to the kitchen and made coffee and sat at the table and drank it, while the light came up over the water, and she let herself feel, carefully, and in measured amounts, the thing that had been pressing against the inside of her chest since the car ride. The slow, seismic shift of a structure settling into a new configuration, the way a building sounds when the stress it's been carrying redistributes itself. Lucien came in at 7. He saw the coffee. He poured himself a cup without asking and sat across from her. She looked at him. It checked out, she said. He nodded. I still have questions, she said. I know. Many of them. I know. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I want to go get my daughter, she said. I'll drive you, he said. I want to go alone, she said. And then I want to bring her somewhere neutral, a park or the beach. And I want you to be there. And I want to watch you meet her without any agenda about what happens after. He was looking at her with the careful attention he brought to everything, and beneath the control of it, she could see the thing it was controlling, which was something that she did not have adequate language for, but which she recognized because she had last seen it on his face, in a different context entirely, reflected in the door of a room service cart in a hotel corridor in Seoul, in the moment before she turned away. Okay, he said. She picked Isla up at 9:15. The neighbor handed her over with the easy warmth of a woman who asks no questions and expects explanations later or never, depending on what's right. and Isla came out in her yellow coat with Benny under one arm and a drawing of a horse she had apparently completed after dinner the night before, which she presented to Evelyn with the serious proprietary pride of an artist delivering a commission. "That's the best horse I've ever seen," Evelyn said. "I know," Isla said. They walked to the beach. It was cold and clear, and the kind of November morning that the coast does better than anywhere else. The light sharp and clean off the water, the sand pale and empty at this hour, the whole expanse of the ocean laid out in full without any interference from the season's warmth. Isla ran immediately toward the waterline with the complete and irreversible commitment of a child encountering a beach, and Evelyn let her go and stood at the edge of the dry sand and watched her. She heard him before she saw him. Not footsteps. She heard her own breath change, which was how she had always known when Lucien entered a room. Some atmospheric adjustment that she'd been telling herself for 3 years was a thing she'd made up. She hadn't made it up. He came to stand beside her. Coat, hands in pockets, looking at Isla the way you look at something that reorganizes your entire understanding of your own life. She watched him, watching her daughter, and she did not say anything, and neither did he, and they stood together in the cold, salt air, and it was the most honest thing they had managed in 4 years of marriage and 3 years of separation. Isla turned around. She saw Evelyn first and waved with the arm not holding Benny. Then she saw Lucien. She was 3 years old, and she had the particular unembarrassed curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to perform disinterest, and she looked at him with her father's eyes in her mother's face, and she walked back up the beach toward them at the unhurried pace of someone who has decided to investigate something. She stopped 2 feet in front of him. She looked up at him. He was very tall from that perspective, and she tipped her head back to accommodate the angle. "Hi," she said. He crouched down. Not quickly, carefully, bringing himself to her level with the deliberate, respectful movement of someone who understood that this required a different kind of approach than anything else he'd ever done. "Hi," he said. "What's your name?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Evelyn, very briefly, a question he was asking without words. She gave him the answer with a small nod. "Lucien," he said. Isla considered this. "That's a long name," she said. "It is," he said. "You can call me whatever's easier." She looked at him with the unfiltered assessment of a child who has not yet developed the social circuitry that causes adults to soften their scrutiny, and then she held out Benny toward him with the gravity of someone extending a significant gesture of trust. "This is Benny," she said. He took the rabbit. He held it with both hands carefully. "Nice to meet you, Benny," he said, and his voice was not quite steady on the last syllable, and Evelyn looked away at the water for a moment because she needed to. "He's scared of garbage trucks," Isla said seriously, "but he's brave about other stuff." "That's good to know," Lucien said. Isla retrieved her rabbit. She looked at Lucien for another moment with the satisfied expression of someone who has gathered sufficient data, and then she turned back to the water because the ocean had not become less interesting in the interval. Lucien stood up slowly. He was not looking at Evelyn, but she could see his profile, and she could see what it was doing, and she could see the cost of it. And she let him have the moment without comment. After a while, he said very quietly, "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she said. "No," he said. "I mean, for not—" He stopped, tried again. "She's remarkable." "Yes," Evelyn said. "She is." They watched Isla collect something from the sand, a shell or a stone, and hold it up to the light with the concentrated attention of a child who finds the world endlessly worth examining. "I'm going to finish the unwinding," Lucien said. "The organization, completely. It'll take another 8 months, possibly 10, and there are parts of it that are going to be ugly, and I need you to know that before they happen, so you're not surprised." "Tell me as they happen," she said. "Yes." "And you live somewhere else," she said. "Not here? Not yet. You find something in the city, something where you're not in her daily life until she knows who you are, which takes time." "Understood. We don't rush this," she said. "I mean that. We do not rush this for any reason, not because we're impatient and not because it would be convenient." "Understood," he said again. She looked at him. "Are you capable of that?" she said. Actually, not as a thing to say, but as a thing to do. He was quiet for a moment. It was the kind of quiet she had learned to respect during their marriage. Not avoidance, but genuine consideration. The pause of someone who is checking what they actually believe before speaking. I don't know, he said. I think so. I've been waiting for 2 years and 8 months, which tells me something about my capacity for patience that I didn't know I had. He paused. But I've never been good at wanting something and not moving toward it. That's a true thing about me that you have the right to know. I know, she said. I've always known that. And you still. And I'm still here, she said. On this beach. So. He looked at the water. She looked at Isla. Jincio left the city that afternoon. No formal goodbye. Evelyn received a text from the number she now had saved. 3 words. Garrett is handled. She didn't ask what handled meant. She put the phone in her pocket and chose to let that particular door be the one she didn't open, and she recognized the choice as a compromise with the world she was in the process of exiting but not yet out of, and she made it with clear eyes. Garrett's access to everything connected to Lucien or to Evelyn was revoked quietly and completely by the following morning. He was not hurt. He was simply no longer a variable. Lucien told her this in a brief phone call that evening, from wherever he had gone to handle the practical consequences of the day. And his voice was flat and very controlled, and she did not ask him to elaborate, and he did not offer to. The federal case number verification came through formally in writing 2 days later, a letter on nondescript paper with a case number she recognized and a signature she couldn't identify, and language that confirmed everything Lucien had told her without saying anything that could be used. She read it twice, folded it, put it in the drawer where she kept documents that mattered. She did not put it with the photographs. The photographs she burned in the kitchen sink the same evening they got back from the beach, one by one, running the tap to carry the ash down, watching her own image in surveillance become water and then nothing. The weeks that followed were not easy. She was honest with herself about that. Lucien found an apartment 20 minutes from her house, and he called when she said he could call, and he did not show up unannounced. And when Isla asked about him 3 days after the beach, asked with the offhand persistence of a child who files things for follow-up, Evelyn sat down with her daughter and told her the simplest version of a true thing, which was that Lucien was someone she had known for a long time who was going to be part of their lives. Is he coming back to the beach? Isla said. Yes, Evelyn said. Can he bring his own rabbit next time? Isla said. I'll tell him, Evelyn said. She told him. He arrived at the beach the following Saturday with a stuffed rabbit he had bought somewhere, brown, approximately the same size as Benny, and Isla named it on the spot with the decisive authority of someone who has been waiting for exactly this responsibility. And the name she chose was Gerald, and Lucien carried Gerald under his arm for the entirety of the 2 hours they spent on that beach, with the solemn faithfulness of a man who understood that this was the most important assignment he had received in a very long time. Evelyn walked beside him on the beach with Isla running ahead of them, and she thought about the ultrasound photograph she had carried on a plane to Seoul, and the way she had pressed her hand to her stomach in the car watching the Han River, and the bathroom floor, and the ginger tea on the counter, and Portland, and the cedar-smelling guest room and the lease signed with a different name, and the delivery room with only the midwife and her own considerable stubbornness, and the 3 years of building something careful and real from materials she had gathered alone. She had built something real. She knew that. Whatever came next, that would remain true. She looked at Lucien carrying Gerald the rabbit with complete seriousness, and she looked at her daughter against the pewter water and the November sky, and she thought about what it costs to be a person who tries, not perfectly, not without damage, not without making decisions that look different from a distance than they do up close, but tries, with what you actually have rather than what you wish you had. She did not reach for his hand on the beach. Not that day. She reached for it 6 months later on a Saturday morning in May when the light was different and the season had changed, and Isla had just told a joke that wasn't funny, but that both of them laughed at simultaneously, and then looked at each other in the shared, helpless way of two people who have been unexpectedly ambushed by the same feeling at the same time. It was a small thing. She reached for his hand and he held it. And they stood on the same beach, and the ocean was doing what it always did, and Isla was running toward the water and Gerald was somehow already damp, and neither of them said anything about it because it didn't need saying. What had happened between them was not simple, and it would never be simple, and the history of it was not going to become lighter, simply because they had chosen to carry it together, rather than separately. The transfers were real. The years were real. The bathroom floor in Seoul was real, and the Portland guest room was real, and the 3 years of Isla's life that Lucien had not been present for were real. And none of that resolved into something clean, and none of it was supposed to. But they were on a beach in May, and the light was the kind of light that makes things look as they actually are, rather than better than they are. And in that light, with all the difficulty visible and accounted for, they were here. That was not nothing. That was in fact the thing. The dragon tattoo faded over the years the way ink does. Not gone, but quieter, the edges softening into the skin around it. The sharpness that had once given it the quality of a declaration becoming something more like a watermark. Lucien stopped thinking about it as a symbol of anything because he was living a life that didn't require symbols. He worked with Evelyn's foundation in an administrative capacity that used his organizational skills without requiring the infrastructure that had once supported them. He drove Isla to school on Thursdays. He learned with considerable effort and moderate success how to lose at board games to a child who was too competitive to let him win gracefully. He was not the same man. He was also, in recognizable ways, still himself. Evelyn had stopped believing those two things were in contradiction. There was a morning, 2 years after the beach in November, when she came downstairs to find Lucien at the kitchen table with Isla beside him, both of them looking at something on his phone, Isla pointing and explaining something with the rapid, assured delivery of a child who is very sure she is right about whatever she is explaining. Lucien was listening with his full attention, the way he listened to everything, and Isla had her father's eyes and her mother's hands and the specific quality of certainty that belonged to both of them and to neither of them and to herself alone. Evelyn stood in the doorway and did not announce herself. She stood there long enough to hold it, the ordinary kitchen, the November light, the two of them at the table, long enough to understand that ordinary was not a lesser version of something else. Ordinary was the thing. Ordinary was what she had moved toward through Seoul and Portland and 3 years of salt air and careful invisibility, and she had arrived at it by a route no one would have planned, and that had cost more than she would have chosen to pay. But she was here. They were here. And the cost, when she looked at what it had bought, felt like the only kind of cost that made sense. Not wasted, not nothing, but spent, genuinely spent, on the life she was now living in. She went into the kitchen and poured herself coffee, and Isla said "Mama" without looking up, and Lucien looked at her over Isla's head with the morning in his eyes. And she looked back, and that was enough. And it was real. And it was theirs.